acknowledging just the authority that can only hurt the body. And then he talks about, no peace but the sword, that, there is going to be times when this message of the cross gets in you. It could divide your family even in a way that your sons and your daughters could be against each other, daughter-in-laws against your mother-in-laws. And this message is not meant to bring peace for the sake of peace. It's meant to bring the sword in that it changes you, it transforms you, it's sharper than any two-edged sword. And that word, that gospel, could make even your family go against you. It could actually change the dynamic of your friends even. It could, it's supposed to radically change you in that kind of way. And so in verse 34 of chapter 10, he talks about, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth, but I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So you're talking about, to the enemies, that's pretty simple to swallow. Okay, I get it. Enemies are going to be enemies. But when it's starting to talk about your own family even. Now, I think this is more in our culture and society. Most people are okay with God in this form of weird version of him. Even if they get it wrong, they're okay. But yet I think more of, especially our people that came out of the Islam, and how that they are rejected by their family in extreme ways, because Islam and Christianity are opposed to each other, thinking that we're wrong and we think they're wrong. And people, when they come out of Islam, their families can just completely reject them, send them out, never to be heard from again. This is some of the kinds of things that they're dealing with. Now, we know that even Jesus's other brothers, or earthly brothers, they didn't believe in Jesus was the Messiah. James, one of his brothers, was only saved until after the fact that Jesus had died and was risen again. And then he kind of came to faith in, his kind of adopted godly stepbrother, that he was actually God in the flesh. And then Jesus talks about rewards. And then we get into chapter 11. And chapter 11 changes the tone because it's really more of an event other than just teaching. Yet all of these events also teach us something. And John the Baptist heard about Christ, of what he was doing. He sends some of his disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, to Jesus to confirm that what was happening was really real. Okay. Now, what we thought was interesting last week, what we talked about for a while, is how the fact that John the Baptist knew from a very early age that Jesus was the Christ or Messiah or something, because even in the mother's womb, he was jumping for joy when pregnant Mary would get close to pregnant John the Baptist's mother. I can't remember her name at the moment, but Elizabeth, yes. And then he proclaims Jesus as, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world at the river. Well, during that time, it would seem like that was pretty set in stone, but he does send some of his disciples to just double check, are the miracles actually happening, or am I just hearing weird things? Are they actually going forth? And it turns out that he does. They are. Jesus tells his disciples, John's disciples as in, that yes, go tell him that everything you see is happening. Lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf is heard, and the dead are being raised. And and then Jesus turns his attention towards John, and speaks to the crowd and to his disciples and to Jesus' own disciples about John the Baptist and how he has a very unique place in all of history. Because you got to consider John the Baptist, in a way, was the very last Old Testament prophet. Okay? Because John the Baptist was proclaiming the king to come, and in his own lifetime, the king actually really did come. And then, in a way, you could say John the Baptist was the first New Testament prophet in a sense, too. And he got to experience this transition from the old covenant to a new covenant. And so he's given recollection in an amazing way. And so is there any thoughts about that? All right. Well, with that, we also pointed out in verses 18, 16 of chapter 11, it says, "But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to their playmates. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn." Well, some of these things, these are very key elements that are he's talking about here, in that playing the flute for you and you did not dance. Obviously, toys were different back then. For a child not to dance when music is played back here, when a flute is being played, that was very unnatural almost to them. It didn't even make sense. And then a dirge, we sang a dirge. A dirge is a funeral song, a sad song, a mourning song. And we played a dirge, a mourning song, and you did not mourn. So you're not really doing what you're really supposed to even be doing. Now you back that up, and in verse 12 it says, "For the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force." That's the only way Satan can really take over anything, is that only by force. Because convincing you to go to eternal destruction doesn't work. And so he has to take it by force. And while he's saying this, he's in referencing also to John the Baptist. Consider, John the Baptist is in prison right now. So some of his disciples hearing this about him, Jesus talking about John the Baptist, he's also seeing this idea, wow, like the violent do take even John the Baptist by force. He's in jail by force, even though he's only proclaiming good news. And in 13 it says, "For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. But to what shall I compare this generation?" So one thing that he is kind of saying right here, he's saying, look, all of the prophets, the law has been talking about this moment right now. About I am here. John the Baptist has been proclaiming me. He quotes that in verses 10. "Behold, I send my messengers before your face, who will prepare your way before me." He's saying, hey, look, that was John the Baptist. That prophecy is what John the Baptist was doing. And all the prophets have been prophesying about this. The law has explained what I was going to be as the Messiah, as someone to come and save. And yet, how shall I compare this generation? How can we understand what I'm trying to say? It's kind of like a child who hears a flute and they don't even dance. It doesn't even make sense. Like, how could you miss that? I mean, a kid, especially this dude, dances for anything. He loves to dance. It's natural to him almost. I mean, a remote control, and he'll just go crazy. It's like you played a flute, but you didn't dance. We sang a dirge. You didn't even mourn. Like, that's what you do. And yet, all the prophets, all the law, and you're still missing it. That's what this generation is all about. Now, he's talking directly to his generation and his people. And so, you want to think about that? Any thoughts?
I'm thinking about this verse in Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah sees the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And so after he sees the Lord says, "Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "Send me." And this is what the Lord tells him, say, "Go and tell this people, keep on listening, but do not perceive. Keep on looking, but do not understand. Render the hearts of this people insensitive, their ears dull and their eyes dim. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and return and be healed." And I think I just see the same thing happening here, especially when you have that verse 15, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. But like you're saying, this generation, just as Isaiah prophesied to his generation, they hear it, but they're not perceiving it or understanding it and responding appropriately. There's no response. Whether it's good news to dance or whether it's bad news, a dirge to mourn. They're not soaking it in.
And I think it's interesting how, even like with the Pharisees, it's like, well, why don't your disciples not fast? Well, the king's here. You don't need to fast. Well, why aren't they acting the way they're supposed to be acting? You consider about all the people that follow Jesus. Now, we don't really know how exactly many there are. We know at some point is at least 5,000, for instance, who was at least listening to him on that hillside. Well, then the first sermon that we know of that was preached by Peter, 3,000 people came to know him. Like, that's pretty insane. And these people barely know what's going on. They heard, oh, Jesus actually died. And so most of them would have been like, well, he must not have been the Messiah because he died. When the whole time the disciples didn't even know why he had to die. It said it was hidden from them until after he had resurrected and made sense. Well, some of this, it's like almost God was keeping some of that seeing and perceiving back until the appropriate time, in that all of a sudden when the church is without the king, all of a sudden everyone starts believing in the king, or at least the church is starting to form and grow. But it's interesting how God a lot of time and how people interact in that way very, very distinctly. Noah was preaching to the people for 120 years while he was building that ark. But it wasn't until the rains came that they realized, oh my word, we're too late. We were reading in in his little Bible last night about Jeremiah, and how Jeremiah was going to the king. Hey, this is going to happen to you. Just warning you. You need to turn back to God. And then he sent a letter. Jeremiah was sending a letter to the king, and the king still got mad, even though the king was literally starting to live out exactly what Jeremiah was telling him he was going to happen. And it's wild how people could be that prone to almost get more mad than say, hey, maybe we should start listening then. Maybe we should start doing that instead of getting them mad. Let's stop with that and let's start doing what we're supposed to be doing. And yet, it's so perfect how Jesus says, well, how shall I compare this generation? He's using things that are naturally understood, and especially in the Jewish context, and then applying it to the people around him. And so those hearers also are hearing it, and his disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, are with him. And they're all hearing this. Wow, that generation. That's very interesting. That's it. I would wonder how much they kind of contemplated some of those things that he was saying like that. And then going back and telling John the Baptist too.
Well, one thing is that they're going to be, you're critical. I mean, John the Baptist, we don't like you. You don't eat or drink. You're a demon possessed. You're a nut. Well, yeah, I can see that. Jesus, you're eating with sinners and drinking. You're a glutton. So no matter what truth does, one way or the other, we're going to criticize it. But I like what he says at the end. Wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. But just wait, you're going to see results from what John and I are doing. And that's going to be the truth. That's like what we were discussing a couple of weeks ago. Like, is it true or not? And no one believes anyone anymore. What is truth? Well, truth, wisdom produces fruit, produces results.
Yep. Yeah, that yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. It's such an interesting thing because he was showing the miracles, showing the signs, showing the wonders, and yet there were people still denying it. And that also shows us something very interesting about humanity, in that just because people say, well, if God would just show up, I would believe. That's not necessarily true. The scriptures actually prove that that's not true. Now, it's nice when that happens, but it's this believing in it's kind of what we were talking a little bit earlier, how a lot of people perceive the gospel as just trying not to go to hell, basically. That's the whole gospel in their nutshell. It's like, oh, I just don't want to go to hell. But that's not what the gospel is designed for. Yes, that is an effect and a cause, but it's you're being saved. Salvation is being saved from something, from the peril of you not being able to forgive your own sins. There's a situation that is not good because you have now condemned yourself by sinning and you can't do anything about it. That's why the gospel is called the good news. Here's the good news. Although you have done something wrong and you can't fix it, the good news is that God fixed it for you. Now you just need to trust in him and accept it. And then it's all good. That's the good news, is that you were in a problem and he solved it. And yet, in these people, they're worried about John eating and drinking, and Jesus eating and drinking, and John living in the desert. And yet, he said, look, I know what I'm doing. The wisdom was going to be justified in this. Like, God knows there's a plan that he is revealing. And obviously, we talked before, Satan must not know theology very well, because he couldn't have realistically thought that killing God would have ended. He's already tried that in heaven, and that failed. And so yet, I wonder if Satan understood that if he had tried to keep him alive. Because we know that he possessed Judas, kind of pushed that narrative, and yet Jesus dying was actually the entire plan the entire time. And we see it from a very early on. I mean, Abraham's like one of the first big names you even get to in the Bible, much less in history. And yet that was one of the first things that God shows us, is that, there's like this sacrifice that actually has to take place. And so it's interesting. Interesting how God works. Any other thoughts? And I can imagine, even all the Old Testament prophets, being able to understand, it's like we talked about a few weeks ago, how, Adam and Eve only knew the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the snake. Well, there's a lot of different things you can do with that. Yet, is that it? Like, a man has to step on a snake and we'll all be saved? Like, no, but the idea is there. Well, then you consider Abraham comes along, and Abraham has this idea. There is a man that will crush the head of the serpent. And then God takes him through this idea of Isaac being sacrificed. Okay, there's a sacrifice also to the man crushing this head of this snake. And then Moses shows up. Okay, there's going to be a man that crushes the head of the snake. And then there's this sacrifice. And God just gives you the law and says, well, there's a bunch of sacrifices that have to take place. And I even would wonder if Moses saw, wow, this is too much for one man to do. This is not going to be like an ordinary man. Like all of our priests constantly, every day, living out this law, and yet we have a line stacked up of people sinning. We live in the same camp. Well, where did you even do that at? Like, where are you having adultery from? Like, we live in tents together. Like, how is this happening? You ever thought about that? And then, but yet at the same time, Moses is starting to say, okay, there will be a man that crushes the head of the snake. There's some form of sacrifice. Ooh, God is showing me all these sacrifices and also all the laws to do with garments and the way they sacrifice. So it's something very special sacrifice. And then you go down to, for instance, Isaiah seeing that. Oh, like they're not even seeing it. Yet we know that the man will crush the head of the snake. The sacrifices are important. This law has got to be just perfect. It has to come together. But yet man is not seeing this. And Isaiah is seeing some of this glory and everything and says, Lord, I'll go to spread that message even further. And you see little bits and pieces of people start adding up more and more and more and more details until the last detail says, hey, behold, this is the Lamb of God that's going to take away the sins of the world. It's all wrapped up in this man but he's not just a man. He's also God. And so whenever even he's talking to people about John the Baptist and how, they're saying he's a demon and all this, it's like, no, if you only had eyes to see, I am the man that will crush the head of the serpent. I will be the sacrifice like Abraham went through. Will fulfill all the laws that Moses wrote about. I will be a king as of David and come from his city. I will fulfill what Daniel has said. We've already been through all of the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Grecian empires. Now we're into the Roman. I am the mountain that will destroy that statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interpreted. And he's all right there in front of them. Yet, you still have to have those eyes that can really see what's going on. And I know for me, that's the most frustrating thing of ministry, is when something seems to be very clear, yet people are not getting it. And it seems so obvious, yet people don't get it. They just don't get it. I was helping someone else counsel someone the other day, and I was like, have you ever told them, hey, probably not sleep with everyone you come in contact with? That would help a lot. And then, like, by the end of the day, this person was living with another person. And it's like, this is obviously your problem. 2 kids, 2 different dads, don't even know one of them. And it's like, tell them that, start there. Hey, maybe not do that. But this person doesn't know the gospel. They don't know Christ. And so.
And that for them has kind of worked a little bit, for a time, for a while, So they just go with kind of what they know. And it's scary sometimes to break out of your shell and try something different. That's a big risk. I've just kind of been working a little more on, I feel like I've been kind of superior attitude and humility, and just say, like, why is it that I have received this gift of salvation? I mean, just humbled by it. Yeah. I mean, that could be my life, but grace. I don't know much, but.
Yeah. Well, and something to go along with that very thing, because I think the Lord's really been dealing with me in a way. I don't know if y'all have verbally heard me pray a lot. Let us never forget what God has done for us. I've been saying that verbally a lot, because that's been something that's really been sticking out to me. And even through this series, like the guy that I quoted on Sunday, I mean, I've known this guy forever. He went down the rabbit hole even deeper the other day, to the point I can't even share the post because you have to bleep most of it out. And it's like, why am I not that person? We were in the same ministry training school together to be pastors, like to do this thing, to get our license, to like go for it. And yet, why am I over here and he is over here? And then I look at a bunch of other people that I grew up with just doing the same thing. It's like, it doesn't really, there's no real rhyme or reason to it. Because I also know the families. I know, like, they come from good Christian families. I come from good Christian families. Like, there's nothing else outside of that. It's like, oh, okay, that kind of, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But yet, at the same time, I was reading Ephesians today during prayer. And Ephesians 1 will I foreknew you before the foundations of the earth. I predestined you. Those whom I predestined, I sanctified, and I justified, and sanctified, and I will glorify. And it's just very powerful how we all have this journey, obviously, to walk, but yet at the same time, God still holds out for those people. The man on the cross, the last moment, he could have agreed with the other guy and said, "Yeah, I mean, what's anything going to do to me? I could just ridicule this guy too. Everyone else is, But then the other guy could have been the other guy and say, hey, we both have done wrong. Could you both remember us? Could you remember both of us in your kingdom? And yet, for some reason, unknown to us, they weren't. He wasn't that guy. He wasn't that person. But it also encourages me in evangelism in a very weird way, because it shows me and keeps me in the understanding that, hey, I'm not the one saving people. And it's very hard to remember that sometimes, even for the good reasons. Like, hey, like I want to do it. Like, come on, just get it. Just enter into this understanding, this thought, but yet also at the same time, it protects me from when they don't. Say, hey, it's actually really not my fault. They have to come to the Lord. They have to say yes. They have to humble themselves and be submissive under the lordship of Christ. And there are some people who don't want to do that. But for me, it encourages me because it takes the weight of all of it off of me and keeps it on God. And then I am just a messenger, just a messenger. And it's interesting because that was an ancient practice too. To harm a messenger was extreme. We know that almost every culture that there has writings about how messengers were like these sacred people. Like every culture that we've really found, if a messenger was sent to them, they were not to harm that messenger because he is just a messenger. The weight of it, you can get mad at the king all you want, but hey, I am just a messenger. And we even have those phrases, hey, don't shoot the messenger. Because I think that actually is some of that image of God bleeding into our own cultures, is that we know, hey, this weight is not on me. I am just the one bringing the message. And yet, that encourages me, knowing that it's not up to me if people get saved or not. Now, we need to do the work of an evangelist, but the weight's off. Any thoughts with that?
I think that's a really hard place to be if you are, confronted with a situation where you think you can help, and somebody or whatever just doesn't accept what you are trying to relate to them. And sometimes it's hard to just disconnect and to say, well, that will take care of it. It becomes sometimes, I guess, I don't know what you would call it. On my part, I feel like sometimes the burden is very heavy. I do constantly get feeling, it's not mine to carry, but it's a struggle. It's a struggle to just let it go and just say, okay, that's going to take, obviously everybody gets some pride to it, but makes you think that you can save somebody. It's just hard to let go of something that you know to be so true and so connected and see, especially after that, walk through something you can talk about.
Well, and that's what's interesting is that the more and more I read the Bible, the more and more I experience people and talking with them and hearing them, the more and more I'm convinced you can't talk anyone out of anything. You can for a little while, maybe, but eventually, if there's sin, it will eventually take over more and more. But if there's life, it will take over more and more. And it's like even when, telling the person, hey, tell the person not to sleep with anyone. Well, this person is, by the definition of Romans, says they're free in regards to righteousness. Actually, you can do whatever you want. You're not any kind of believer, so you can do whatever you want. You're free in regards to righteousness. You are made to obey the sins of your flesh. You can't even help it. You can only pick what is wrong in the sight of God. You can't. You have no other choice. But what they do need is the gospel. And then, hey, here's 5 steps. Okay, first, stop sleeping with everyone on the first day. Stop. You need to. But I don't know. It's interesting how Christ will work a lot of that out of people. freeing them from that. It's like a lot of things we just know, hey, this doesn't seem right. I don't know why it's not right, but it's just not right. And yet when we're baby Christians, we God gives us a lot of that grace that allows for this change to start changing upwards. And some things fall off immediately, but some things take a while. And yet God is patient with us through that process. And that is a very blessed thing, that he is patient with us. And not as some count patience, but so that many more may come to him.
And we could go on with it
Mm-hmm.
in itself. I know, I'm like, oh, no, it's not tonight.
That's for
So,
an
like,
offline.
maybe it's not that person we're supposed to talk to and maybe we'll go to, but maybe that one's predestined. Let's go over here to this
Mhm.
one.
All
Yeah.
you have to
Then
do is just be obedient to what the Lord tells you to do.
go.
You'll
Mhm.
be fine. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of the Samaritan woman at the well, talking about people who have some pretty broken lives,
Mm-hmm.
and how, even Jesus just, really gave her a message of hope instead of one of condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have some really, you would never have to draw water from here again. I don't know if you've seen the Chosen episode with the woman at the well. It's
Mhm.
good. But it goes back to Jeremiah, where Jeremiah says, the Lord says, my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And that's what I feel like we see in this world, is people, kind of trying to work on their own instead of going to that source, making a kind of little broken cistern, but it leaks, there's no water, the water's contaminated, but they are working so hard and still very thirsty.
And that's what's interesting about when you become a Christian. So many things make more sense for so many reasons. Like, that's obviously why people jump from relationship to relationship in the world. It's like, yeah, that would make sense, because you're trying to feed into something that you don't have. But what's interesting is that no matter who you are and what status you're in, you know that there's also something you need to feed. You ever
And you
observe
kind
that?
of, you yourself probably know the truth, but you're like, well, that was kind of a bad cistern. I'll go over here. This cistern
Seems this
Mhm.
might work.
Yeah.
Let's try it better.
So, you can, the enemy or even yourself can say, well, that was kind of that situation, and
Mhm.
hopefully this well will be a little better.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that in a spiritual sense, everyone still has the cistern in the first place, though. And I think that's that law written upon our hearts. That's that image of God trying to kind of come out, and yet people are always thirsty for more and more and more and more. And whenever you become a Christian and saved and be able to see the world objectively at that point, everything makes so much more sense. It's like, how could people be that evil? Well, there's probably evils we haven't even heard of yet. How can people be that confused? Well, if there's no hope, your identity is not found in God or anything, that you're just a fish, bumping another fish. Well, I'm surprised you're as doing as good as you can, as you are. Things make so much more sense in the Christian worldview for even practical things like that. That just people trying to get as much as they can, building up treasures and building up kingdoms on this earth. Because if this is the only place you're ever going to be, you might as well. I would see that objectively. Yeah, if this is the only thing that there is, you might as well live it up. If you believe this is the only thing out there. But yet we're living for another world, a better world, a better kingdom. And and we're just aliens among this. And that's when you start feeling like, wow, this is weird. Like these people, I mean, I was just thinking about the politics and stuff that's going on. It's like you can see it's just such a worldly, carnal system. It's like it's just nasty. It's just like, wow, that makes so much sense. But there's destruction and there's chaos and there's lying and cheating, and like everyone knows it, yet no one knows how to fix it. Why would they know how to fix it? They don't serve the one who has truth. They're free in regards to righteousness. Y'all should really be lying a little bit more. But the image of God in you is shining forth even in the darkness that you can't even escape it. You just can't do it. Somehow you can't do it. That's why I said the phrase, it's weird when people say, well, we're all fish and we evolved and stuff. And then you're telling animals, stop acting like animals. It's like, well, they kind of were, maybe they're just acting like you're telling them how they are. Well, if I'm an animal, I'm just going to act like an animal. I'll lock tens of thousands of people up in prisons every year because we're just animals. What else are they supposed to be? They're animals. And yet when we can see it from the outside, it's so frustrating whenever people can't see it.
I think we're going to have to be a lot more verbal or bold about the source of our hope and joy, though. Because I think people look at us and say, well, yeah, of course you've got a good life. You're married to Ed Hastings. I'm like, I know. That's probably why they think I'm so happy. And, well, if I was married to my mechanic, I'd be happy too. I think they see us and see, some of the things we have, but not really. I don't think we're bold enough about the source. I have a good life, not because these kids, this husband, I live in Gothenburg, Come on, Mayberry.
Yeah. I think about even when you said, the woman at the well and how her sin is totally exposed. So people know about that, right? But I think the enemy's deceived so many people that even today that there's so much people that are living like that woman, but it's very secret and very private. And no one gets to see that. So there's no, in some cases you can't even approach people because now things are hidden. Things are doing in their homes and so forth. There isn't that, we stoning this woman because she's committing adultery, or this person that you're talking about, going after one person after the other. But people are doing things, exact same thing, just in a more private way that the enemy has created situations for us to be comfortable in our sin that even other people don't get to see. So you can't even confront anyone about it because you don't even know what's going on in people's lives.
Well, and it's like, pornography, you used to have to go to a grocery store or a gas station and pick one up and be seen by people.
Exactly.
And,
so there's a little bit of shame going to do that, so you might
there was a little bit of,
But now in your own home, you tap and you sit and no one ever knows, and so it's just, I don't know.
Satan loved the internet when that concept, I'm sure he was just waiting on that. Like, guys, you got to figure this out. We could spread sin way easier with that. And yet it can be this greatest good and yet the greatest bad at the same time. And yeah, it was, that was something that is interesting. And just how even the media works in general and how we were talking about this, a few of the pastors, and I'm going to share a little bit about this 2 weeks from now, how back in 1993, there was like this huge shift in the way people perceived, for instance, homosexuality, marriage, like that. And you can look at statistics and you can see this just very dramatic change. And yet, one of the most popular shows at that time started. One of the most popular shows of all time started during those few years. That was Friends. TV show Friends. Friends, a bunch of friends hanging out. Nothing's wrong with it. Does anyone know what the first episode of Friends was about? It was about I never really saw it either, but not Chandler, but the other guy, the other taller guy, not the smaller guy, Ross. His wife was divorcing him to go after another woman. And by the end of the series, by like several seasons in, he walked his wife his divorced wife down the aisle to her like lover. Now think about how subtle yet profound that moment is. At the same time, Satan has been allowing for people to get on the internet a little bit. Things are starting to spread. Things are a little bit being more open and accepted. Then they take this dramatic step like that, and it's not such an abrasive thing. Like a lot of people are like, well, that's kind of weird. But these friends are kind of goofy, and my friends are kind of goofy. Yet at the same time, we can accept a lot of like, wow, this is very subtle. Like, well played, Satan. Well played. And then you get Will and Grace, which steps it up a whole different other level. And then, because we may be talking about biblical manhood and womanhood also in a few weeks, and considering like what we talked about a few weeks ago, how Raymond, everyone loves Raymond, the dopey husband that was not a leader, not in charge, not this example of what biblical manhood looks like. Then you have King of Queens come along, which is basically a carbon copy. It's from a different angle. And then you have Al Bundy and what I think his name was Al Bundy, and I can't remember what that show is. He basically the same thing, a little bit earlier. And you have all these.
Seinfeld making fun of
Yeah.
homosexuals and.
Yeah.
I mean, like he could not have a show like that today.
No. But he was a good transition.
No soup for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he did a good transition because George Costanza was always jumping from girl to girl to girl
Oh,
to girl
totally.
to
I mean,
girl.
it was simple, but
yeah.
they made fun of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's an episode where
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about homosexuality. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but like,
Yeah.
they did not want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they would, I don't know. It's just interesting. It's subtle. It's slow fade.
Mm-hmm. And so, I think going back to your point is we need to start being much more verbal about these things. Because, people can generally see people when they're happy and be okay with that. But yet, how much are we proclaiming? And I think that one thing we need to preemptively do, because obviously Satan has planned this, is even with teaching like our kids, and how, like I told Shelley, how I want to raise him to where he doesn't think math is just numbers. No, math is God had the ability to create logic out of chaos, and how he established numbers. He established sequences that can't be broken because he is a God of order, and how math only works because he is a God of order and strategic planning, a creator and a sustainer. In that the way our language works, and that God once confused our languages, because if you use your language for evil, he confuses it so that you'll spread out like the Tower of Babel. And how purposely are we even thinking through some of those things? How God has led us into this time where, like, son, the world around you is chaos. However, because God has a plan, you have something particularly special that God has a work for you during this chaos. And although you're fearful right now, here's the good thing. You're here because God knows you can take it. Because I think back every once in a while, I'll read a page or two of, Fox's Book of the Martyrs or something like that. And I'm telling you, some of those people were a different kind of people. I mean, to be thrown into a lion's den with your family, and then what they did figure out is, well, it kind of was over at that point. So what they started doing was like keeping the husbands back to watch their families being eaten by lions. And they said, we will stop all of it right now if you will turn away from your God. You're not even feeling the pain, but everyone you love is feeling the pain. It's another step in depravity. And even just practical things like the pilgrims. I mean, I know this is a little off, but I got done reading Lewis and Clark's tales of the entire expedition. Those were different kind of men that did that kind of. He got attacked by like 4 bears. Did y'all know that? Like usually when you get attacked by a bear, yeah, this guy got killed by a bear. Well, was he attacked? Yeah, he died. He got attacked by like 4 bears and lived. 2 of them he stabbed to death. A bear. They kind of do whatever they want.
You kind of imagine, like, you know how fish stories get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering. Like,
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, like, whose account was it?
These were personal journals. I'm just saying.
They're personal journals, yeah. The fish got bigger.
I think there's just leave there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The moral of the story
I know.
is that, I mean, people are put into a position by God because they're really the right person for it. Now, they may not seem like they're the right person for it. Moses may not have seemed like he was the right person. However, Joshua, he was a warrior. What if God sent Joshua to do what Moses did and Moses to do what Joshua did? Joshua would have said, hey, let my people go. No. Okay, we're killing all of you. That could have been Joshua's response because that's what Joshua actually immediately did every time. He says, you run out. Go away from us. He told the Gideonites, he says, you tricked us. You better be glad that our God is merciful because I would have killed you right now. And yet, wonder if Moses came in to lead the people through a conquest. Moses, yeah, he fought a few battles, but that was not Moses's thing. And so we know that throughout time and throughout situations that God uses people for certain things and certain reasons and certain purposes. And we need to know that the chaos that's going around our world, for some reason, God has us right here in this chaos. That we are made for such a time as this, in whatever way this is.
And Moses been like Joshua, he would have come
Yep, he should have been to the problem. Yeah,
Oh,
but we may not hear any stories about plagues.
that's
Okay,
Yeah.
let's finish up Matthew 11. Verse 21. Good. 20.
Says, then he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you have been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it would be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. And that's a powerful thing to understand. Sodom's point of view is that Lot was there. I don't know. We don't really see him necessarily doing much. It seems in the New Testament they reference him back to kind of proclaiming the good news or proclaiming that God is going to judge Sodom. But remember, when the angels showed up in Sodom, they weren't there to proclaim, hey, you better stop acting like this or we're going to destroy you. The angels showed up to destroy them. It was done. Judgment was already over. They didn't have the signs and the wonders. The only signs and wonders that happened was 2 angels destroying this city, utterly destroying it. And so that is something that to take into consideration. He's like, look, man, if I would have shown those miracles to them, they would have all repented. They'd have put on sackcloth and ashes. That would have been the thing. Yet the people, even though he was doing miracles in some of these cities, the miracles didn't necessarily translate to this salvation. Some people can see something right in front of their eyes and miss it. The Pharisees did it every single time they saw Jesus. And yet, so that's one reason why, we want the gifts, we want to see miracles. However, the message of the gospel has got to be the most important thing that draws people in. Because here's the thing, wonder if God just all of a sudden started doing miracles just crazy, one after the other, after the other, after the other in every single service. That would be pretty cool. However, we would get a lot of people wanting to see something fancy happen. And yet at the same time, God says Jesus said, blessed are you who do not see and believe. Because at that point, they're not going to stay for the miracles if they stop. They're going to leave. But they're going to stay for the message, because the message will continue to be proclaimed no matter what the miracle or the sign or the wonder could be that happens there. And so in verse 25, it says, at that time Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's a very comforting piece. And yet at the same time, he also says, wide is the gate to destruction and narrow is the way that leads to eternal life. But the way that leads to eternal life, the yoke is easy and that burden is light at the same time. It seemed almost like they would be contradictory, yet one can be narrow, but yet still easy in the sense that it is light. And obviously, he's also referencing back some of what to the law, little images of how the law was very heavy. And during these times of the Pharisees, the law was even heavier because they added a whole bunch of rules that weren't actually in the law. And if you really, because I've studied Phariseeism a little bit, and what's interesting is that many scholars looking at the rules of the Pharisees agree that only a Pharisee could really do all the stuff that they required. They put themselves in this position that they were the only ones even possibly able to be righteous, because you basically couldn't have a job. You couldn't have a normal life. You had to focus every moment of every day on being righteous in order to fulfill the law in the first place. And then they added more rules. And so some of the things when you see Jesus talking to these people, you're talking to a people that are in a state of saying, well, even if I try my hardest, the Pharisees really, I can never be as good as them. But then that's why Jesus said earlier, says, actually, your righteousness needs to exceed that of the Pharisees. And so he puts the Pharisees in their camp as well. But yet at the same time, he puts everyone on an equal playing field, and he gives them the message of hope that's for everyone. And so that's what's so amazing. And that's some of those words, my yoke is easy, my burden is actually light. Because the thing is, my burden is my burden. It's my burden to take your sins upon me and sacrifice for you, because you can't do it anyway. My burden's easy because I take the burden. That's the point of it. All you have to do is accept it. That's easy. The burden is actually gone. And so it's very easy. The yoke is easy. My burden is light. Any thoughts with that?
I just read what you wanted.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Well, and I think, with going along with that, I cannot imagine Christians within this time frame going. I can't imagine many American Christians going through a lot of that stuff. But I think as a whole, what you are seeing is we're starting to be polarized, but this time in a good way. You're starting to see not a lot of wheat and chaff mixing anymore. You're really starting to see people draw some very strong lines of where they believe and where they do not believe and they will not accept. And so I think those lines, though, are helping to strengthen the real church so that when persecution comes, we are as tough as those kinds of people, if you understand what I mean.
The bride is being refined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it didn't say we won't be refined. It just says he's coming back for a perfect one. That means we are going to be refined and that we're going to be changed. But as part of the bride, as just a super marriage day antidote, there's like a bunch of ladies that walk into a room, but only one comes out as the actual bride. Bunch of ladies. You would not know who was the bride that walk into the room, but when they're ready, there's one true that you can distinguish between everyone in the building. And I think back to the shepherd, his look, I am the shepherd and my sheep hear my voice. And they come to me when I call. I think that's powerful alliterations for us. Any other thoughts?
I think it's so frustrating. I can't imagine how frustrating this would have been for Messiah, and just to think about how he was right there, the Son of God, God incarnate with them physically, and yet they could not see it. In fact, not only could they not like even question it, but some of them just were critical of him, or saw the miracles, even saw the manifestations, but still said, I'm not going to change. But I think I probably would have been one of those persons too, who would be like, because Heidi and I, we don't believe in anyone. 4 dares, whatever. We're skeptics. Right. I don't know. I'd have to see that for myself.
Show me where it's at.
But I think his heart would have been broken. Like, I am the way, I am the truth. Come to me, please, softly and tenderly. Jesus calling, come on. And yet they are going to walk away from me, and going to walk away from that life.
Yeah, if you're talking about say that the scripture that says Jesus wept.
Yeah. To know that he had it all. Oh.
Okay, well, remember back in the last town, Kristen? I fed the 5,000.
Well, and I think that right there is why you see Jesus saying phrases like, y'all don't know anything. Like, y'all know nothing. Like, have you not been taught?
I mean, that's
have you
the
not
way
been listening?
that we have always been in history. We get out of Egypt. We saw all those signs and wonders in Egypt. We saw our God defeat the Pharaoh. And then we get out. Oh, my word. What is all this water here? We can get across. And then, oh, my word, we don't have anything to drink.
Yeah.
How about some food? It's just always. And we do that in our own life. I mean, now that I'm old, I can kind of look back and I remember how faithful he's been. But, I mean, there's still, like, your chain gets yanked almost every day. Like, what in the world?
You don't even remember the blessing from yesterday, a month ago.
Yeah.
And, you can't even draw on that. That seems so far away when you're trying to deal with the current situation.
Yeah.
So let alone, I just think, I feel for them. I do. Like, we have kids.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Mhm.
It's just like, I don't know. I'm sure you just, oh.
And
You know,
I mean,
right?
it says, "Do not test the Lord like you did in the wilderness." Oh, test it again. Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to come through with it.
Yeah, I can imagine that frustration.
I get frustrated with my kids for things like, I just told you yesterday. You know? And the poor kid is like, well, I don't remember whatever. I'm like, I just saw, but I told you yesterday. You know, something. And I get frustrated. And I'm like, I have no mercy or patience for that. And I'm expecting, you know, the Lord to constantly have patience on my part. I'm like, I might. Giving classes, Jeff?
I'm a sponsor there.
Hi, my name's Jeff.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, man. Yeah. It's interesting. It's sad. It's a sad world. It's sad people.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, we say that though. We say that. And yet,
You're going to get in your car and forget.
Yell at somebody before they go.
Yep.
Parking lot.
I mean, it's like, when do we stop saying the sayings
And be
actually-
doers of the word.
Yes,
Yeah.
and live it. And live it. And just.
Mm-hmm. That's why I said his patience is, don't count patience like that he's just taking his time. He says count patience is he's giving more time for those to come to know him.
Mhm.
And that's why I think constantly we're taught, look, God is not a man. He's not like man. He's different. He thinks different than us. He reacts different than us. He can't change. He can't lie. He can't be tempted by sin. He won't tempt with sin. He's very, you see this all throughout the Bible. God is very different than how we are. Yet, we are also made in his image. And so we can share in some of that. But yet, he is still very different in a lot of sense than us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what is the big
Jesus.
Yeah.
And me.
The good part of us is just dying. It's Doug Wilson was saying that. He said, a lot of times as Christians, we only consider half of this idea that Jesus died so that we may live. He said, in a lot of ways, Jesus lived so that we can actually die. And that's not the end.
I know, just that in that chapter 10 that you read over, he says, if anyone wants to follow me, he must pick up his cross. Well, he said that even before he had picked up his, which is weird. I mean, we just read that and we automatically think of him on a cross. He said that even before he did his own cross, that he showed us.
And you have to wonder, because later on it says, he hid this from his disciples until after his resurrection. I wonder what his disciples thought. What do you mean cross? Like, is it the Romans? Like crucified?
Yeah.
Yeah, how they would have interpreted it.
Exactly how they would have looked at it and question.
But it's funny because how the Pharisees even asked him, like, well, how do we be born again in our mother's womb? And to us, it's like, that was a really weird question. You had like this chance with God and you were like questioning if you could crawl back in your mother's womb. Of course not. That's obviously not what I mean. I mean, by the Spirit, you'll be reborn. And yet, they're like, the cross. So like, we picked, like, up our cross. Like, I don't have a cross. So, do we go get a cross? Do we make a cross? Am I going to have to die?
So
Mhm.
that's probably pretty confusing.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the spirit yet, and so,
hmm
yeah, and just their human
And to
brain.
those who knew Old Testament prophecy, trying to put all of that on Jesus at the time, like, whoa, yeah, we're going to set up a kingdom. Yeah.
Mhm.
So did anyone even understand anything that was going on?
I think it's as ragtag as we are, really.
I'm serious. I mean, did anyone get anything?
He calls them children all the time. I think he was just like you and your kids, like, what are you doing, kids? And sometimes it did click, and then sometimes it was.
Well, and we see a few times when it did click. Peter says, well, you're the Messiah. You're the Christ. Peter,
And
on
then
that
he
rock.
also said, never, Lord. And then he also called Peter
Yeah.
Satan. So,
Yeah.
it's just like,
But I think a lot,
But
I mean,
yeah.
obviously, a lot of the teaching became truth for them once,
yeah.
afterwards.
And then they
That's when
received
were
the
like,
Spirit,
yes,
and
and
it started
then all of the things that they're like, then
yeah.
it's built to them, like you said, like how you could not see the things
Mhm.
before you are saved, and then all of a sudden things make sense.
And you
Yeah.
can imagine up on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter thought back, like, oh my gosh, I want to build an angel an altar and an altar. How many dumb things did I say to God? Wasn't like
I still think
just
that's
a man.
a good idea. It was nice, a nice gesture.
Yeah. It's like, Peter, you remember when he called you Satan?
Remember when you asked who got to sit by you?
Yeah.
And you almost drowned in the bacon.
You almost-
Favorite.
Yeah.
He's probably like, oh, brother.
Yeah. Or he could have just been that one sibling that you're like, you go ask.
Yeah.
That was Shelly to her sister. You tell me those stories all the time. You were the one always questioning, but and Sarah was like, okay. Something super embarrassing or something like that. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question about the homosexuality that you're going to teach us.
Mm-hmm.
So have you done a lot of study about, like, some of the other languages talk about homosexuality as in the word where it
Pedestry?
talks about not the same sex, but it's children that it actually means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you gonna touch
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I'm going to issue with that directly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's thought that arsenokoitos means pedestry, which is an ancient Roman practice of having young boy sexual slaves, basically.
Okay.
Roman soldiers from a very, very young age. Boys would be given over to an army, and they would serve, and then they would get kind of like sea war, and that's why Rome was amazing at battles, because from ages of 6 on up, you were literally on battlefields. And then that was called pedestry, because the men would take these boys as basically sexual servants, and they would molest them basically. And but they believe that arsenokoitos, some people think that it means that, but there is literally no evidence for that. There's none. There's
Because that's
Yeah.
a big
Mhm.
argument for
Mhm.
homosexuality, that scripture does not in fact say
mm-hmm. Yeah.
that it's talking about homosexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no Greek scholar would agree with that. None. I don't know of one. Now, if you type "is homosexuality a sin," the first 5 pages are people trying to produce that. Mm-hmm. And that's one reason specifically that I'm going to make that the very last point. Because even if that is true, you can derive that to be a sin without needing even the word in it. You can. And what's interesting is that the information is so incredibly solid, it's ridiculous that they would think that. Because arson, it means man, and koitas is a summary of 2 different words specifically used in Leviticus 18 and the Greek Septuagint, which Paul had access to. So Paul went out of his way to use Old Testament language translated into Greek to form a word with arson, a man, and it means the active and passive partnership of a man and man active relationship. And so, I mean, there's just no way around that. That's just people just trying to get it. And
To make
Mhm.
it okay. And
Mhm.
it's just so it's so frustrating.
Mhm.
Even conversations with other believers in this field.
Mhm.
I don't understand how you're just trying to make it okay, or is that
Yeah.
are you gonna slide over here because this person's a good person and you think that they really are safe, but you just
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I was talking about on Sunday is that Satan realized, hey, just trying to keep people out of church is not going to work enough. What I need to do is I need to get some people in church that are actually not saved. That would be good. Because instead of, well, I just don't believe in God. Well, it's in us. It's in us to believe in God. Romans says that. It's written on our hearts. He's made it apparent. And so he's not going to keep enough people out of church and out of Jesus to be effective. And so he needs to get people in the church that are actually not really sheep of his pasture. And that is an obviously easy one because you can let people have Jesus, believing him, but yet living in unrepentant sin, which is defeating the whole purpose, but thinking it's okay. That's an excellent play. That is intelligent in the sense but yeah, you don't need the word homosexuality in the Bible to prove that homosexuality is a sin. And we're going to really slow that down and talk about the order of creation.
Yeah, and just the sacredness
Mm-hmm.
of sex
Mm-hmm.
and the design.
Yeah. The order of creation is a hermeneutical principle that you always have to fall back to because uh, before the fall, God himself said everything was good that he made. And one thing that he made that initially was good was a male and then a female. Well, what's interesting, before the fall, he also spoke the words, and a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. Well, after that, then the fall happens. Think about elders and deacons, husband of one wife, deacons, husband of one wife. So if you are a homosexual, you do not have, you have after fall effects, not for the order of creation. You're deviating from that. Padastry wasn't in Leviticus, and Leviticus directly deals with homosexuality in chapter 18. God never blesses it, ever, not even one time. In Corinthians, not where arsenokoitos is used, it's a different for immorality even. He says that such were some of you. Like you actually were these people, but yet you even changed. And then you get into, so then you can't be an elder and you can't procreate, which is a direct commandment from God. That's actually what's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that. Go and multiply is a direct commandment from God. Now, if you can't, obviously there's natural causes because of the fall. That's not your fault. Like if you can't have a baby, obviously you're excused from that. But you are commanded to go and multiply. Well, you can't under that situation. And so there's just layers of, of evidential, unfortunately, yes.
yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
totally. I just
Yeah.
think that more churches and to really start being bold about this because I think it's always okay to know the truth and go to scripture
Mhm.
and learn so that you know. But we're living in a society where I just don't feel like that a lot of people were raised with the truth and
Mhm.
God's word. And so you have probably some non-believers that really are struggling, and then they're going to some churches that are feeding them some things that,
Mhm.
or maybe,
Or staying
maybe
away from things.
right? That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Because you can talk a lot about a lot of good things without saying anything about homosexuality. You don't have to. You don't have to get there.
I mean, like, it's kind of weird. I grew up in the Baptist church, and I've always known homosexuality was a sin, but I don't ever remember being preached on the pulpit.
Mhm.
but somehow, I mean,
Yeah, somehow you picked up on it.
well, I mean, I knew it, and
Uh-huh.
I've never questioned it since for a very long time. But yeah, it's just
Mhm.
interesting. I think to be so bold to actually speak on it
Mhm.
is huge.
Mhm.
And
Well, that's why I'm going to speak on it.
Hope you guys are praying.
So I'm going to speak on it
Asking.
right now before it gets too hot. But then, well, I mean, even more in Ephesians, husbands loves your wives, and wives respect your husbands. Okay, so where is the instruction for a husband and a wife and a wife? God gives you no instruction for how to treat each other. That should tell you also. And the thing is those are a lot of things that will like, well, that's talking about that kind of marriage. Yeah, but they didn't specify any other kind. And that is why eisegesis bad, exegesis good. You are putting yourself into the text. Oh, well, he's just talking about marriage, but he said man and wife. And when in leadership, he said husband of one wife. He said in the beginning before the fall, man and woman, fathers and mothers, you'll leave to be joined to your wife. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to say that and bless that union, and he never did. Also, consider what is now this is one of probably the last point I'll make. Is consider what Pride Month is all about, what the flag is for. They chose a flag that represents people were so sinful that God destroyed the world. Honestly, that was just a bad pick in a flag. You're going to say this flag represents you and God blesses it when that was given to us to condemn the world because of sin. And then I'm going to spit off about 10 or 15 scriptures about how, if you will notice, that most of the sins in the Bible are sexual sins, generally speaking. So many things. Leviticus 18 through 20 is called the Holiness Code. Most of that is just literally nothing about relationships and sexual identity within that. And so the thing is, people state all the time, well, why does God, care so much about that? It's like, well, because y'all won't stop doing each other and doing bad stuff with each other. You won't stop. That's why most of the law is just dealing with immorality, because it honestly affects so many of us and stuff.
Well, and I think too, in all honesty, like someone, I think the hardest part is the homosexuals that say they're believers,
Mm-hmm.
believe in a God, go to a church that caters to their preference, and then yet are probably some of the nicest people.
Mm-hmm.
Some they serve, they do all these things. I think it's hard to reconcile that they potentially are going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
But, or is that just a sin and they just don't know it's a sin? Or if you really are in the Word, then you eventually maybe the Spirit would teach you that is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think that there's that, not that we know who's going to heaven and who's not, and I can judge hard, but I think that's where a lot of Christians really kind of want to reach and be like, maybe it was okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it was okay,
Mm-hmm.
And everything else going on.
Yeah.
But,
Well,
right,
and what's interesting is that at the same time they say, well, we shouldn't judge. You're making a judgment right there. You are making an affirmative judgment instead of a negative judgment.
And if they are in fact believers, then we ought to judge.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, and also,
where you going to be at on that?
Yeah, he'll say something. He'll say to people who actually seems like they legitimately prophesied in his name, and yet he never knew them. And so, I mean, just sin is destructive in its nature, and I would think, as an enemy, that would be pretty good to have people think that they're saved, completely okay, and yet not be saved. Because I think that would be a greater defeat as an enemy. To not just defeat people and have them strung out on drugs and heroin and meth and their teeth are falling out. They know their lives are a wreck, but they don't have Jesus. They can't get together. Like those people kind of know, hey, this is not the best life. But to have someone who thinks that they're perfectly okay is the better win. It really is. It's the better win. Just being the devil advocate at that moment, that's the better defeat.
Do you think they're deceived?
As far as
Do you, just like we kind of talked about Joel's thing, do you
Mhm.
think he knows he's deceived? Or do you think
That's
he's
what I wonder.
trying, yeah, but so I mean, I'm saying that same thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is the enemy using them and they know they're being used, or they just totally just don't know and they truly think that?
The people that I have personally come in contact with, I think that they are deceived themselves. I don't think they're purposely doing that. And honestly, I think the more I study, I think that people that purposely know that they're deceiving, I think that's a lot less than people who are just dumb. It was a really incredible podcast I listened to the other day, and it was called Bargaining for Stupidity. And it talked about how the political process, he says there's two ways we can think about people. People are either dumb or they're smart and evil. He said, and I think we overestimate the amount of actually smart and evil people are. He says, look, people are dumb. They're just dumb. He said that's why people will believe truth that or false stuff all the time, false narratives all the time. He says, you only need one or two really evil, smart people to convince a whole nation of dumb people. He said also keep in mind, we naturally form leadership. You put a group of people and say, hey, you got to get through that door and it's barred. Someone naturally shows up as a leader.
Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
Jack.
Mm-hmm.
I had to teach this novel, Lord of the Flies, several years
Yeah.
in a row.
Yeah, we had to read Lord of the Flies.
Group of boys on an island, leave them alone. Someone's going to be the leader. Someone's going to get killed.
Yeah. Yeah, you read that book, you're like, that sounds about right.
That is the world.
It's definitely.
Pretty simple, right there in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to get into all of that.
Okay.
As much as we can, as far as we can, as deep as we can go.
You record your messages, right?
No, we're doing it live. But it's also recorded. Mhm. Yeah.
That's what
Yeah, unless it gets taken down. We haven't had anything taken down though. But
You'll save it, I'm going to be gone the next week.
yeah. Yeah.
So am I.
Yeah.
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 We got a preview
Yeah,
tonight.
Jeff can bootleg it.
Yeah.
For you.
He's got his
Sell me
little
a copy.
phone. Taping it.
Subtitles and everything.
Jeff, I'll buy a copy.
Now, can you is it loud in that?
You all have to keep quiet while he's talking.
That's right.
This week is Who is Jesus? Who is the real Jesus? We're going to go through a few style progressive Christian thoughts about how Jesus is. He's really not like we think he is. He was really, he was the helper of the homeless, and he would have stopped all of the. He would have been marching in the pride parades. That's a meme I see a lot of times, and we're going to go through some of those things that are pretty generic that I have seen. Like I've said, I've been on this Facebook group for a few years now. It's called Discerning Progressive Christianity. Very interesting. A lot of good conversations going, some wonky ones, but for the most part, good. And there's been a lot of good direction as far as people will put up a meme, like how would you respond to this? A lot of times we're like, you don't need to respond to it because they're just asking for a fight. However, this is biblically how you think through what they're trying to say. Michael Gungor said that today. Michael Gungor used to be a Christian artist. I think they were called the Gungors. Yeah. 4 or 5 years ago, he left Christianity. He deconstructed his faith and he forgot that he was dumb. And I deconstructed my faith and I became a better Christian. So I don't know. That must not be the right word I should use, but he said, he has this tweet and it says, everyone is Christ. Jesus was Christ. Islam was Christ. Buddha was Christ. Christ is the idea of the world looking at itself. You are Christ. we are all Christ, one body. And it's like, that doesn't even make sense really, but we're going to deconstruct that a little bit and just, people's constant deception. And they're not even creative anymore. It's like, that doesn't even make sense. Ugh. But, it's insane what people put on Facebook.